Rational expressions. In this video, we're going to talk about the fundamental property of rational expressions, multiplying and dividing rational expressions, and finally, complex fractions. With me, Catherine. After the video, you're going to do problems 1 through 13 in Rational Expressions Part 1, and then 1 through 4 in Rational Expressions Part 2. Let's get started. Here's the definition of a rational expression. It may look familiar because it's the exact same definition of a fraction. The only difference now is we're going to start using polynomials. Why can't q be 0? Remember, in the fraction, if the denominator is 0, it makes it undefined, and that's not a good thing. Let me show you a basic example using a fraction. First, we're going to factor the top and bottom, which is exactly what we're going to do with polynomials. Then, we're going to start to cancel everything that's the same on the top and the bottom. And whatever is left over is our answer. Let's look at our first example. Write the rational expression in lowest terms. The first thing we have to do is factor everything. So for the top, we need to find the greatest common factor. And so I kind of did it here, 8x equals 8 times x, and then 8 times 3. So 8 is our greatest common factor, and hopefully you remember we put 8 in a parentheses. We divide everything by 8, and we factored it. Now, let's do the bottom. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So I have 10x equals 10 times x, and 30 equals 10 times 3. I'm going to circle anything that's in common, so 10 is our greatest common factor. I'm going to make 10 in a parentheses, then divide everything by 10, and we factored it. Now we just do a substitution. On the top, we're going to write 8 times x plus 3, and then on the bottom, we're going to write 10 times x plus 3. Just like we did for the fraction, we're going to cancel everything that's the same. So I'm going to cancel out the x plus 3's. Now I have 8 over 10. But remember, with fractions, we always have to reduce. So on your calculator, you're going to do 8 ABC 10, or however you do it, so that you reduce it to 4/5. Smack! That's our answer. Not bad, right? Let's look at the next one. Write the rational expression in lowest terms. The first thing we have to do is factor everything. So we're going to do the exact same thing we did for A. 3y squared equals 3 times y, and negative 6y is negative 1 times 3 times 2 times y. We're going to circle everything that's the same, and that becomes our greatest common factor. So we're going to write 3y in a parentheses. We're going to divide everything by 3y, and we factored it. Now we have to do the bottom. Remember, for this one, we have to multiply to negative 2 and add to negative 1. Our magic numbers then are negative 2 and 1. Y minus 2 times y plus 1. Next, we're going to just substitute back. So on the top, we're going to have 3y times y minus 2, and on the bottom, we're going to have y minus 2 times y plus 1. Now we get to cancel. Sometimes I like to call it slashing. So let's slash everything that's the same. Well, that's only y minus 2. So now we have 3y over y plus 1. Does anything cancel? Nope. Smack! That's our answer. Determining when a rational expression is undefined. Well, we kind of talked about that just a moment ago. Remember, if we have 0 in the denominator, that's undefined. Sometimes when we solve, we're going to end up with an answer that we call extraneous, but that's in a couple videos ahead. First, we want to just figure out what numbers will make the rational expression undefined. In other words, we're going to find the zeros in the denominator. Let me show you an example. Find all numbers for which the rational expression is undefined. Remember, we cannot have 0 in the denominator. And then I ask again, can we have 0 in the denominator or the bottom? No. What number will make the denominator 0? Well, for this case, we can kind of see that it's 2, because 2 minus 2 is 0. How can we find it using algebra? Well, that's actually pretty easy, because what we do is we take the denominator and say it cannot equal 0. So we'll say y minus 2 cannot equal 0. We're going to do some algebra, and y cannot equal 2. So let's look at our question. Select the correct choice below and fill in any answer boxes within your choice. So the rational expression is undefined, and it's undefined when y equals 2. This will become important when we solve rational expressions. And I kind of mentioned that, but that's a couple videos ahead here. Find any values for which the rational expression is undefined. Can we have 0 in the denominator or the bottom? No. We need to factor the denominator. This one isn't as easy as the last one. For this one, we have to multiply to 4 and add to 5. If you're having problems factoring, you need to return to the last lesson that we did and review. But let's keep going. It turns out that 4 and 1 are our magic numbers. So x squared plus 5x plus 4 factors into x plus 4 times x plus 1. What numbers will make the denominator not equal to 0? Well, how can we find that using algebra? Well, we make each parentheses not equal to 0, because remember, we don't want it equal to 0. So x plus 4 cannot equal 0. That turns out to be x cannot equal negative 4. And then x plus 1 cannot equal 0. And that turns out to be negative 1. So in our answer, the rational expression is undefined for x equals negative 4 and negative 1. Once again, this will become important when we solve rational expressions, a couple videos from now. Multiplying rational expressions. Remember, a rational expression is just a fraction. So when we multiply fractions, we just multiply straight across, and then we reduce. Multiply, write the answer in lowest terms. So the first thing we're going to do is split everything up into a multiplication. So on the top, I did 5 times x times 3, and on the bottom, I did 3 times 3 times x times x. Next, we're going to slash everything that's the same. So the x's and the 3's. That leaves us with 5 over 3x. And that turns out to be our answer. Let's look at another one. Multiply, write the answer in lowest terms. The first thing we have to do is factor everything, and then we're going to cancel. On the top, I wrote 6 times x times x. 2x plus 3y squared means 2x plus 3y times 2x plus 3y. On the bottom, we're going to have 2x plus 3y, and notice that I put those in parentheses, times 5 times x. Now, let's do some slashing. The x's are the same, and 2x plus 3y are also the same. You're going to notice that I canceled everything in the parentheses because they go together. I end up with 6x times 2x plus 3y over 5. We're going to leave it like that because that's in lowest terms. Let's look at another one. We're going to multiply and write the answer in lowest terms. For this one, we do have to factor everything. So on the top, hopefully you remember, that's z squared plus 0z minus 1. So we're going to multiply to negative 1 and add to 0. That means our magic numbers are negative 1 and 1. Let's look at the bottom here. We need to multiply to 4 and add to 5. That makes our magic numbers 4 and positive 1. So we have z plus 4 times z plus 1. So let's substitute that in. On the top, we'll have z minus 1 times z plus 1 over z times z times z. And then we're going to have 8 over z plus 4 times z plus 1. Now we get to do the fun stuff and slash. Yep, that's the only thing that slashes. So now we have z minus 1 times 8 over z to the third times z plus 4. To write that in lowest terms, we just put the 8 out front. 8 times z minus 1 over z to the third times z plus 4. Not bad. I want you to pause the video, try this one. Yep, you need to factor everything, and then press play to check. All right, let's see how you did. When I factor the top one, I know that I have to multiply to 6 and add to 5. So I end up with x plus 2 times x plus 3. For the bottom one, I know I have to multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 5. That gives me x minus 8 times x plus 3. And I just substituted those in. Let's look at the other side. I have to multiply to 4 and add to 4. Well, in this case, that's just 2 times 2. So it factors into x plus 2 times x plus 2. So let's substitute that in. Now we get to slash. The x plus 2's cancel. Remember, they're in parentheses, so the whole thing has to cancel. And then the x plus 3's, and then the x minus 8's. What does that leave us? 1 over x plus 2. So how'd you do? If you're still having problems factoring, you need to review that. Dividing rational expressions. Dividing rational expressions is very similar to multiplication. To divide fractions without a calculator, we flip the second fraction and multiply straight across. So let's look at my little example here. 1/3 divided by 2/5. We change it to a multiplication and flip the second fraction. You're going to notice that in the original it's 2/5 and then I flipped it to 5/2. Now we multiply straight across because it's just a multiplication. That gives us 5 over 6. Since 5 over 6 doesn't reduce, that's our answer. Now let's put some letters in there. Divide and write the answer in lowest terms. So the first thing we'd have to do is change it to a multiplication. So you're going to notice that I have y squared plus 4y plus 3 in the numerator in the first one, and then I popped it into the denominator or the bottom for the second one. Hopefully you notice that I also changed the operations from division to multiplication. Now we get to factor. So for this one, we have to multiply to negative 2 and add to negative 1. It turns out to be y minus 2 times y plus 1. For this one, we have to multiply to 3 and add to 4. That gives us y plus 3 times y plus 1. Next, let's smash it all together. So on the top, we're going to have y plus 3 times y minus 2. Then on the bottom, we're going to have y minus 2 times y plus 1 times y plus 3 times y plus 1. So let's do some slashing. And what are we left with? 1 over y plus 1 times y plus 1. We can also write y plus 1 times y plus 1 as 1 over y plus 1 squared. Cool. What about this one? Well, first of all, let's flip it. You're going to notice that I flipped the second fraction. When we look at this one, I have 5 minus j and then j minus 5. Well, math is really cool because we can make things. So for the top, I can actually take negative 1 times j minus 5. So how exactly does that work? Well, when I distribute, I end up with the original 5 minus j. That means that negative 1 times j minus 5 is exactly the same as 5 minus j. So let's substitute those in. Now we can slash, and we end up with negative 1 times 14 over 8. Remember, we need to reduce to lowest terms, so hopefully you pull out your calculator and you end up with negative 7 over 4. That's the same thing as negative 7/4. Let's look at this one. First thing you're probably going to notice is I have a fraction divided by a fraction. For this one, the easiest way to do it is to rewrite it. Instead of using the line like a fraction line, we're going to use the division symbol, the one that we see on our calculator. Our next step is to change it to a multiplication and flip the second fraction. Next, we factor though. So I have to find things that multiply to negative 81 that add to 0. And that gives us t minus 9 times t plus 9. So I just rewrote that, and you multiply straight across. So on the top, we have t times t minus 9 times t plus 9 over 8 times t plus 9. We could also write parentheses t plus 9 and the 8. Doesn't matter. But now we're going to cancel. And what are we left with? T times t minus 9 over 8. Cool! All right, you guessed it. Here's the self-quiz. You're going to pause the video, find the answers, then press play to check. Let's see how you did. Well, here are all the answers so you can check yourself. If you got one of them wrong, keep watching because I'm going to go through each one. Let's look at number 1. So the top, I factored into 5 times x minus 1, the bottom, 7 times x plus 1, and then 6 times x plus 1, and then 14 times x minus 1. We're going to slash everything that's in common. So we end up with 30 over 98, but remember, we have to reduce, which gives us 15 over 49. Let's look at number 2. For this one, you need to factor a whole bunch of stuff. The top factors into z plus 6 over z minus 8. The bottom factors into z minus 6 times z minus 6. Hopefully you remember to change the division to multiplication and flip the second fraction. Now we're ready to slash. Z minus 8 over z minus 8, z minus 6 over z minus 6, which leaves us with z plus 6 over z minus 6. If you need to write all this out, pause the video and write it out. I have to go to the next screen to show you number 3. For this one, we had to change 7 minus j into negative 1 times j minus 7. That's what I substituted in to the top over 8. We changed the division to multiplication and flipped it, 10 over j minus 7. Then what I did was I slashed everything that's the same. That gave us negative 10 over 8. Remember, we have to reduce fractions. So we end up with negative 5 over 4. Or we could say negative 5 over 4. All right, now it's your turn to practice. So on Math Excel, you're going to do problems 1 through 13 in part 1, and then you're going to do problems 1 through 4 in part 2.